White women are ready to mobilize for Trump, even though he hates them, hates all women of all colors. And not especially white women, but most certainly white women. Now, why would it be that white women are willing to support Donald Trump in large numbers, even though he does not have their best interests in mind and has a history, an absolutely dreadful history of abusing women and speaking in a very negative and objectifying way of women? Well, let's talk about it. First of all, these women must hate themselves, as this article points out. Underlying their self-hatred is a deep racism. And if you are a white woman who is truly and deeply racist, but unable to come to terms with that racism, it could lead to a certain amount of self-hate. And that self-hate could encourage the woman to decide that maybe it would make sense to vote for somebody who doesn't have my best interests in mind, because what value are my interests when I'm deep down an evil and racist woman? Well, very likely that's a factor. This article on Jezebel goes into a lot of other considerations, but when you think about it, it sort of makes sense, doesn't it? That a white woman who is deeply racist but doesn't want to come to terms with that racism, or even approach it in a way that would allow a resolution, which would be a non-racially motivated way of living in the world, like you and I live, right? This kind of woman is unable to vote her best self-interest. So what can be done about this? How can we cure these women of their willingness to vote for Donald Trump and their hatred for their own kind? For example, here we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is one of the most cutting-edge Democrats right now. And I know you all know who she is, but Cortez has a tendency to say things that are true. And a lot of the white women who support Trump just cannot tolerate that kind of truth. And so they have this deep-seated hatred, not only because she speaks this truth, but because she is so beautiful. Hard to believe. And it's disgusting. It really is. Anyways, back to the topic. How can we get these women to no longer vote in their own self-interest, or lack thereof, I should say? Well, what we need to do is we need to point out to the women that the reason they're voting for Trump is because they hate themselves, and that's going to take some soul searching. We're going to have to expose them to shadow work, to understanding the things about themselves that cause them to hate themselves. I think this really applies for everybody. I mean, everybody in a sense has certain elements of negativity that keep them from being their greater good and keep them from serving their own best interests. And keep in mind, everybody, your best interest is most likely the best interest of those around you. It's in the best interest of those around you. Sacrifice is something that people who hate themselves do in order to have the impression or give the impression that they're doing something positive, and that's why they're suffering. However, your suffering has nothing to do with your ability to benefit those around you. In fact, those things are completely, if not decoupled, they're completely opposite. Well, how can we encourage this? Well, what I would say is we need to start a campaign. If you know a white woman who might support Donald Trump in the upcoming election, what you need to do is have a heart-to-heart conversation, especially if you're a woman. Now, if you're a man, you know, maybe you're not as able to communicate with a woman. But woman to woman, I think these conversations can happen in a less hostile and less patriarchal kind of setting. There's no power dynamic between two women. There's no oppression. And so maybe that's a safe space where you can come together with your white female friend and say, hey, listen, you are trying to destroy yourself when you vote for Donald Trump, and it's not in anybody's best interest. You are going to ruin not only your life, but the lives of everyone on the planet. Hard to make an argument with that, isn't it? I think it is. If you have other ideas or suggestions about how we can get these women turned around, get them voting the right way, and how to end their racist ways, I'd like to hear those. You can put them in the chat, or you can put them in the comments down below. I'll be back in a minute.